Today is joining me David Quigg. As is stated at Sierra's Club website, David is a dad, musician, and gardener who has always felt an obligation to give back to the web of life that has brought him so many gifts. David, welcome. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start with the first question today. The World Commission of Environment and Development defines sustainability as, and I quote, the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But I want to ask you from your own perspective, what does sustainability means to you in your work and life?
Yeah, thank you very much, Yusef. Well, so interestingly, in that quote, the ability to meet the needs of the present, um, we have to ask ourselves, well, what does that mean? Because the needs of the present, according to the story of what people feel entitled to have, and the appetite for uh, the kind of consumption that the needs of the present are packaged in is far beyond the carrying capacity of the world, as we know. So I think we need um to truly live sustainably and to live within the if we're thinking of donut economics, to live within that circle, the donut. But maybe some people are not as familiar with that model, but to live within a harmonious, um, give and take balance with the world requires a radical shift from where we are currently living. So what does that mean in my present life? Is That's actually a very difficult question to answer, because the water that I swim in is a water of over consuming. Um, Even in my intentional practice to try to not have a huge impact and live in greater reciprocity with all life. Um, Being a resident of British Columbia, not living in a cooperative way, relying on, sometimes going to Costco to buy food, or, uh, having a car to drop my daughter off at school, all these things. Um, they're all beyond what is helpful for the earth. And when I say helpful, I mean the ability of the earth to sustain its carrying capacity of us and all life for many generations to come. So it really is a design problem, in the sense of how are we going to all live together on this finite planet with the numbers that we are, with growing, close to 10 billion people. So how can we do that in a way that makes sure we can all uh, meet our basic needs and have some left over for the joys and um, abundance that we can feel like we can participate in. I know that's more of a theoretical answer, but it's hard to envision when uh, when I'm living in such an unsustainable way. Like I'm living in a detached house, with a car, with a dog, which is amazing, but all the meat that's required to feed that dog, etc. So how could we reimagine that? I think those might be questions further on down the line.
You're mentioning the balance, and I don't know if it's related to this, but it might. And this leads me to the next question because I understand you propose there is a multi generational responsibility in this world, right?
Mhm.
So, but my question is, how do you translate this into your professional or personal actions in matter of sustainability?
Yeah. So always thinking, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and she's always on my mind, thinking about the kind of world she's inheriting. And so what's so important, and where so many environmentalists, and I use quotes around that word, get tripped up, is thinking like, okay, how can I be the most sanctimonious environmentalist and be as righteous and, maybe shame some other people on my path of righteousness. That's not at all what we have to do. What we have to do is, like I was saying before about the water we're swimming in, is one of terrible overconsumption, terrible over reliance on fossil fuels. So, as far as a multi generational responsibility, we owe it to the generations to come to do everything we can in this short window to completely shift our addiction to fossil fuels, our reliance on forms of energy that are guaranteed to create an unlivable, potentially unlivable, but you know, guaranteed catastrophic future that is potentially unlivable. I mean, those things are in this moment we are right now. It's hard to imagine, but if you're on a Samoan island, if you are in Pakistan during those floods a couple years ago, or in a heat dome here in BC a few years ago, where we had a mass casualty event on a scale of over 600 people dying, those things are real in those moments. So we have to think, yes, we all need to do our personal actions, but the water we're in has been very intentionally designed by billions of decisions by decision makers, corporations, moneyed interests, lobbyists to create a whole ecosystem of a world designed to keep us on this track of hyperconsumption and hyper reliance on fossil fuels. So we need to concentrate our effort on maybe dismantling is not the right word, but to to come together in such a way that we are not um, perpetuating that cycle of harm. So that involves intentional decisions, intentional ways of relating, but it also involves very intentional actions to steer our decision makers away from that total reliance on what is leading to our demise.
Now that you mentioned that, I remember you suggest to reimaginate a better world, right?
Mhm.
Designed for healing, for climate cooling, and growing deeper roots in the interconnection. So, but how do you consider this can be reached? How can we reach these points to, I mean, not just reimagine it, or I mean, maybe that's a first step, right? To
Mhm.
reimagine, to start developing. Because if you don't set what we want to reach, it's going to hard to be there, right? So, but the question is, how do you think we can reach to that point where everybody is willing to be part of this uh, improvement that the world needs and we need?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it seems so big and so hard, so it seems hard to imagine, but I'd like to bring it into an immediate, uh, tangible way. I mean, the first step really is gratitude, and what that means is to notice when we're craving what this massive machine of hooking us on more ever since we were kids, to notice, okay, that's a craving that is outside of me, that is being manufactured by a, a, a very powerful system that wants me to crave more, want more, buy more, consume more, take more from the earth. But what about what I have here and what I have now? Isn't that enough? Isn't that beautiful? And how can I concentrate on what I have being celebrated? And it's difficult because we live in a world where we're always comparing ourselves to others. We live in a huge scarcity crisis when it comes to housing, and I think that is really pulling the rug on a lot of people where they're not feeling, if you don't have adequate housing, you don't feel safe and secure. So you're going to be in wanting, craving mode all the time. And if you do have, if you've won the housing lottery, like like in BC, Vancouver, Victoria, other areas, then you're sitting on, upwards of a couple $1,000,000, and you're feeling like, "Oh, well, I have to protect this. I have to, uh, you know, make a bigger fence around my property. I have to secure my wealth." So, I think to the first step being gratitude, to feel grateful for what we have is so important, acknowledging that it's difficult in this ecosystem we're in, but also to really acknowledge that, and I'm taking this from a beautiful passage from Robin Wall Kimmerer's work, from the Serviceberry, which is an essay that she put out. So she talks about a anthropologist that goes into a hunter-gatherer community. I'm not sure exactly what the date of this is, but the hunter-gatherer kills an animal, a large animal, and brings it back to the group. And the anthropologist asks the hunter-gatherer, "Well, what are you going to do with all this meat? It's more than you can eat. How are you going to keep it from going bad?" And this person says, "Oh, of course, I'm going to share it with my neighbors and with everybody around me. Storage is not a problem. I store my meat in the belly of my neighbor or the belly of my brothers." I think what the quote said. So, I mean, immediately that is the instinct of somebody living in gratitude, in reciprocity, and the security that comes from knowing that, okay, my hunt is going to be shared and my neighbor's hunt is going to be shared. There there we can relax. Our human nervous system can downregulate. We're not in this hyped up mode of, I need more because what if there's not enough? What if I enter a situation where I can't have enough?
I know you have experience in education. Do you think education help into this mindset improvement? And if it's so, do you have any recommendation on how to improve this mindset change or mindset improvement to reach a better future in sustainability matters?
So I was an elementary school teacher for 10 years in the Toronto area. And those I learned a lot during those 10 years. They were beautiful moments. They were also very difficult moments. Classroom teaching is very hard, and I raise my hands to anybody who's doing it. Um, so the to answer your question, within the classroom, there's a system that's been set up, since the 1800s when the social experiment of mass education or industrial education became established, where we are ranking students based on their performance all the time on different tasks. What does that do to the child? Well, if you have, you can imagine if you were, if you were adults, if your job was always being marked on every assignment you did and you got a grade on everything you did in any workplace, my God, I think you'd want to quit. It would be so stressful. And you'd always feel like you're being judged not only by this boss, might be the teacher, but also by your peers who are excelling in different ways related to you. So education has perpetuated so much harm in terms of creating a system where children, with their young minds, their beautiful imaginations, and their ideas, are put into this artificial environment where they're competing against each other for approval, or the stamp of, I'm somehow a valuable person based on how I performed on this multiplication test, whatever it is. Things that really don't matter in the scheme of things in terms of how we can exist together and relate as a society and as a culture in order to take care of each other, in order to maintain the social fabric we need to care about each other's differences and needs. So that's one side of education. That's education done poorly. Education done right can look very differently, but it needs to extract itself from that competition model where it's judging kids against each other. And what it can do is bring children together from a very young age into a communal environment where we are celebrating difference and we are acknowledging that we are not all meant to fit some arbitrary mold. And if you don't fit that mold, you're somehow deficient. Um, this is very hard to do when you have an education system like I was teaching in Ontario, where I had to give letter grades starting in grade one. I remember my first year teaching, I thought, this is insane. And my administrators were saying, yeah, you have to give that kid a D. They didn't pass. I said, I'm going to tell this 6-year-old that they failed, give them a D and brand them with that. Well, that's how they did. What does that do to the child? What does that set them up for in their brain, in their trajectory for the rest of their life? So teachers are under a lot of pressure. If they're in an education system like myself, teaching in that system was very, very hard. Um, Here in BC, I'm very grateful and thankful they've gotten rid of letter grades, and there is this much more open-ended system, although it is still marking students based on progress, which I think is fine if it's not a comparative thing that they're using against each other, but more of a intrinsic motivator or a reflection, a marker of how they can do and proceed. Anyways, that's a rabbit hole for a whole other topic. But um, let's look at First Nations communities. And I do not speak as an expert here, but from what I've learned, education is the absolute bedrock of everything they do. And instilling in children from a very young age a teaching of their obligations to not just the humans in their life, but to the more than human world in their life. Everything could be, it could be even trees, plants, you name it. This feeling of you are held by them, you are part of them, they take care of you, you must take care of them. And the stories that, when you read very, very old stories that are probably date back thousands of years, the teachings in them are all about care and reciprocity with the natural world. We can learn so much about the multi-generational teaching of 7 generations. Well, what does that mean? What does that actually mean to think? And it could be generations in the future, but as I've heard it taught too, it can acknowledge some of the generations past, which of course I'm sure it does, and look forward to generations in the future, where this view, this long arc of thinking, well, what did my ancestors do to make sure that I had a life of my needs being taken care of? What can I do to make sure that my children, grandchildren, etc., have their needs met?
At this point, I'm making the connection that what you mentioned about acknowledged everything we have and be grateful, and this 7 generation or multi-generational responsibility, right? If we start making decisions based in what is going to happen 7 generation after us, we're going to make different decisions. Following everything we are having at this point in our conversation, we're mentioning the mindset as one of the main challenge. Do you consider there are more challenges or obstacles that we are facing now, as maybe as individuals or as organizations, that we are facing today to integrate sustainability into daily practices?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the mindset feeds a culture which feeds the systems of power, which dictate whether or not it's possible to to live sustainably. So it is all related, but to move from individual to culture, which I've been talking a bit about as well, as a whole culture, we have to decide, just like we have junk food, we have our fast food restaurants, McDonald's, whatever. If you eat at McDonald's every day, there are going to be consequences. In our culture, we have junk values. And if you indulge those junk values and are always thinking, how do I buy the latest thing here? How do I practice fast fashion here? How do I get the latest iPhone? Without thinking about what that's actually doing to the planet that we all rely on, those are junk values. And so, as a culture, unfortunately, in this late stage capitalism moment that has been so fed by this free market ideology, that that is what all these narratives and stories have been saying, that's what we need to be happy, is the latest whatever, whatever, whatever. The bigger the better, the more expensive the better, you name it. We all know this story. Has it made us happier? Absolutely not. We are more miserable than we've ever been. So we have to really think as a culture, are these junk values serving us? Or is there another system of values that we can invest in? But in order to do that, we have to shift our energy and our investment. And I know um, the people, especially the older generations that have accumulated most of the wealth, have a lot of money investing and sitting in perpetuating the old way of being. And so, our pension plans, our banks are putting billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars into a system that is absolutely unsustainable. It's feeding the tar sands, turning bitumen, tar in the most energy intensive practice into crude oil, which, it takes an insane amount of energy, it takes insane amount of methane gas to even liquefy the stuff, and you name it, and then shipping that into tankers that are destined to spill and, you know, harm the orca and Burrard Inlet, you name it. There's so many consequences that the money of the cohort that has the wealth at this moment is still perpetuating and and moving, and that is tied to the junk values. So it's what we do in our life, what we buy, what we do, but our money is not neutral, and it's active 24/7, and it is causing so much harm, no matter what our values are in terms of, I'm going to go to this protest, I'm going to write a letter to a minister to say that fracking and LNG export is bad. That is one step. But if you're banking with TD, Royal, any of the big five banks, if you're invested in XYZ funds that are perpetuating those harms, that is part of the junk value system that is unraveling the planet and making it unsustainable for the generations to come. So it really requires looking at our individual actions, our culture as a whole. And a huge part of that culture is where we're putting our economic resources. That phrase, money is energy. Well, where are we putting our energy? Are we putting it into uh, basically a doomsday machine that fossil fuel investment is a guarantee of? Or are we going to shift it towards something that will give us a chance of having a more sustainable life for generations to come?
Can you share with us, David, please, your hopes and aspirations
Mhm.
for the integration of these sustainable practices into daily living? And how do you believe these practices can impact our personal lives and the broader community, as you mentioned?
Hope is a four-letter word, and it's hard to feel hopeful sometimes when the momentum of the system that has been so created, funded, expanded for hundreds of years is just steaming ahead and accelerating even faster. And the inequality is greater than it's ever been. We have billionaires moving into trillionaire territory almost. We have people that are so desperate to find homes. We have massive climate impacts happening all around the world. And so we are in this moment of critical chaos. And we have this very short window to act, as we keep hearing about, to turn things around. So the hope comes from action. So I feel hopeful when I act. If I don't act and I think, oh, I hope my daughter is going to have an okay life, that is completely void of potential and a reality. But by doing the work that I'm doing, and I'm very grateful to have this job where my job is to be an organizer, meaning connecting with the public, to bring them into campaigns, to hear their ideas of stories and change they want to see. And what I'm hearing, especially from the younger generation, is a rejection of those junk values. And what I really hope for is that the older generation that holds the power, largely politically, because they're the cohort that votes the most, but certainly economically, what I really hope for is that they align their love for their kids and grandkids, their love for the natural world, because that's what this is all about, with uh, an actually sustainable future, meaning they're shifting their money, they're shifting their voting habits towards something that will benefit their kids and grandkids, and not just, this sort of scarcity mindset of like, oh, I'm going to be okay and I'll make sure my family's okay. Because think of an ecosystem. Think of how did those trees grow so big in a coastal rainforest? Well, they didn't do it out of competition. One tree didn't say, I'm going to suck up all the resources and grow enormously tall. If it wasn't for the mycorrhizal network that connects all the trees, if it wasn't for the nitrogen from the salmon, from the participation of wolves and bears to bring that nourishment, if it wasn't for all the inputs into that ecosystem, those trees would not be mighty and strong in a community to last thousands of years. So we have to think that way as human beings. If we are going to last, if we are going to be nourished and be well, how can we work together to build that strength and nourishment for all of us, not just, oh, I'm going to get mine and me and my bubble is going to be okay. So these are the architects of the future who are placing a bet that we are going down and they need to protect themselves. So, how do we counter that? Well, we need to be architects of a future that take care of each other, that don't buy into that really sad narrative that big tech and others are perpetuating, but that buy into a narrative of cooperation. Anytime you join a community garden, you get your hands in the soil, you meet a farmer, you go to a farmer's market, you participate intentionally in a local coffee shop, a local economy ecosystem, you are nourishing those fabrics and that mycorrhizal thread that will help all to thrive. Conversely, every time you uh, participate in something outside of that, which we all do. I mean, like I was saying, sometimes shop at Costco for affordability reasons, etc. Is that really a good idea for the planet? It's hard. Um, it's not terribly clear, but we have to start thinking in ways. How can we like a forest ecosystem nourish each other and everything around us?
Thank you, David. And do you have any suggestion and concern about sustainability practices that we might have missing during the interview?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's the big one is if sustainability becomes a market-based solution, meaning if we're going to just pivot to extracting oil, to extracting minerals or renewable whatever, but our appetite for goods and our appetite for energy remains the same all around the world, are we going to actually have a sustainable planet? Absolutely not. So we have to, at the same time as we are pivoting away from reliance on fossil fuels, which are by far the most harmful thing we could ever do, and pivoting to solar, wind, etc., we have to think about how do we also live in a more intentional way that is not as harmful and energy intensive. So it's a both and moment to not just think, we just have to flip the switch and electrify everything. Yes, we absolutely need to get off fossil fuels, but we need to invest in each other in a smaller, coexistent way of being that doesn't rely so heavily on exploitation of the earth.
Dear David, thank you for your time today. I am sure your message will bring for all of us encouragement to do our best and to keep in mind the future generations to come and the impact we have in them with our decisions today. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Yusef. Wonderful to meet you.